Hi, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of our Justice and Peace's guest speaker series. As always, the views and opinions are of the candidates alone. They don't reflect me, Justice and Peace's, Trias College, or any of the other organizations that I'm affiliated with. And today we're going to continue on with our paralegal Meet the Paralegal Bencher Candidate series. Today we have Sean joining us. So Sean, thanks a lot for taking the time to join us. Perhaps you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself. And once again, thanks for joining.
Good afternoon, Paul. Thanks for having me. Been a paralegal for 25 years. This is my second run at the bencher's seat. I'm all about governance. I'm all about accountability, responsibility, profitability, and faith. And I do believe that there is room for expansion. And I do believe that this law society needs to expand. In what direction and how fast, that has yet to be determined. I don't think we can go back, and I don't think we need to shrink the number of benchers. I think that they should increase the numbers of benchers. I mean, how are we going to address the public interest if there's not enough benchers to even hear what the public interest is?
All right, so let's start then with this being your second time running. So, from the first time and compared to now coming back at it a second time, what's motivating you to step forth and give your name another run at it this time?
Well, basically I see all these people who come into my office for 25 years that have nowhere to go, no one to help them, and the resources that are given to them, like in community law firms and stuff like that, it's utterly insufficient. There has to be an alternative. We need to grow that if we expect to be a law-abiding country. You just can't talk it, you have to walk it. And I think the resources need to be reallocated and they need to be expanded. You can't have law society members running around trying to earn enough money so that they can pay their kids' medicines and all that, when in fact, there should be one global plan for all licensees. If you're paying a license, like any union in the country, there should be benefits that come with it. And it's certainly not something that can't be done.
Now, this time you're running, and I believe with some of the other candidates. So, what kind of brought about that process there? Maybe you can tell us a little bit more of some of the shared vision and ideals that you and your colleagues have.
Well, I love to listen to people. I love to hear the way they think and what drives them. And I also like to hear how they think it can be done. And this election, I don't know if it's, well, I would say it's unfortunate that I haven't had the opportunity to meet with all the benchers individually and collectively to see how we can work on our ideas and get them on paper and then get the finance and get it on the road. But at this point in my little circle, the two gentlemen that I'm working with, Jeffrey Smith and Matt Olson, I know them to be competent individuals and inspired and looking to do a good job, and they're always willing to listen, and they're always willing to accommodate. I think that's why I joined with them. And I didn't need the notoriety. I've been around a long time. I mean, I'm not that far off base with, I would say, more than half of the law society, probably 60 or 70% of them. There are things that we will all agree on, things that we won't, but the best thing we can do is work to move the public interest and the benefits of both sides of the licensees towards sustaining something that can last beyond the next 100 years. I don't think that it's fair to assume that new licensees, lawyer or paralegals, are out there, not able to get the help that they need, other than, major league stuff, addiction research and all that kind of stuff. But I'm talking about being able to have a benefit package, no different than any construction union, grocery store union, truck driver, the same kind of thing. There's, with the total numbers of paralegals and lawyers, are we talking over 100,000? How do we not have benefit packages? How are we going to be healthy and energetic enough to address the concerns that we want to discuss over the period of time it's going to take to not only survey them, plan them, and implement them if we're not healthy and looked after? And the whole thing is that we need to start looking after the group, not just looking after our individual agendas, and then joining up with other people to call it a slate or good governance or whatever you have it. If you're not talking about the public interest, then you're not talking to something I'm going to listen to.
Now let's look at the public interest there, and from your perspective this time around, and whether it's just your own thoughts or with Jeffrey and Matt there, what are the most important things looking at the public interest that are on the table for this upcoming election?
Well, you can go myriad of family to immigration, and then of course the statement of principles and CDI hours. There's a myriad that they're still trying to work out. The two regimes are fighting and then belittling each other constantly. They're always running each other down. If you can't listen to somebody whose opinion you can't handle without saying something negative, then you are the problem, not what they're saying. That, if it ends quickly, if it turns around, if we get these things that we need to support the licensees better, I think you'll find a lot less infighting and problem solving in that regard, because they don't solve problems by alienating each other. And that's what I see a lot of, and that's what I see a lot of in the interviews that I've watched. It's not a good commentary. I've been around 25 years, and I learned that, to put it in the terms that I know best, I gave you 2 eyes, 2 ears, and only 1 mouth. What do you think you should do more of? Some people learn by listening, some learn by watching, but nobody learns by defeating somebody else's idea, or belittling their credibility. At this level, how could you even suggest that somebody is mindless or don't know what they're doing? You didn't get that degree and you didn't pass that exam by not knowing something that's of value, and your personal experience to me is worth something. But there are things that we have to hone down to what we can afford and how much justice we can accomplish, and those things need to be brought out and worked on vigorously. And it takes more than just a bunch of benchers. It takes volunteers. It takes a province. Hopefully that will influence the rest of the country.
All right, so let's start then with scope there. You mentioned immigration and family. So what are your thoughts on, first of all, what the family law service provider that ended up coming out from, I think, December's convocation, as well as, it's kind of, the topic of the day of, can paralegals do this? Why can't they do this with respect to immigration? So perhaps maybe you can kind of expand a bit on your thoughts there on those areas of scope.
Okay, well, let's start with competency, okay? That is pretty much a baseline that we can discuss in all of these expansions that everybody wants or doesn't want. And let me just say this. I don't think, and I've been in court in small claims and landlord and tenant and, smoked lawyers, and they've smoked me, and it's not about that. It's about doing my best and not, look, my principal rule in this office with my students is to teach them to get it right, not to be right. Because if you try to get it right long enough, you're going to invent a light bulb and you're going to be right. You've just got to have the patience to get there, and you don't want to have to add to that misery by trying to fight with everybody else to get your opinion heard and voted on. So when it comes to immigration, clearly the federal government says it's ours and the Law Society is opposing. Okay. So on the road to it being expanded, no different than JPs were suddenly on the scene with justices and paralegals suddenly became on the scene with lawyers. This is going to expand whether we like it or not. 100 years from now, there will be 10 times the amount of paralegals and 20 times the amount of lawyers. Will those paralegals read the same books that lawyers do? Do they have the ability to read the same books and take an exam like lawyers do? What does lawyer and paralegal mean? It just means you're identifying, you're not welcoming. So if we continue to identify each other, we're going to continue to separate our minds and our ability to solve problems together. I don't subscribe to anything that deters my efforts to get to a solution rather than discussing somebody else's problem with their view. And yes, competence is a huge thing for lawyers and paralegals. And I think the Law Society should be looking at the competency that merges both of them together. And I'm not saying one license, but is it time to move towards licensing for special things like they're talking about with family law, immigration? Is it so wrong to have to study a certain book or have a certain course? When I took the course for the tribunal adjudication. It was a 5-day course at Osgoode. I learned a lot about how to include people and how to get things moving along and how to be fair and how to coax people instead of shoving them in the right directions. I think we can accomplish a lot if we work together. I'm really looking forward to that part. And quite frankly, I don't mind a glass of wine while I'm doing that kind of listening. I think the people at the Law Society and the benchers already are my kind of people. And I want to be there to move things forward, especially on the heels of the people that have already done their best for 3, 2, 1 appointments. It's something I want to share and I want to be part of. At 60 years of age, I've probably got 30, 40 years left on this planet. And I want to leave it better than I found it. I think this profession needs a chance to grow, and I think it should be included in all areas. There's nothing to gain by waiting. And I'll tell you, when somebody says sorry or be patient, trust me, it's a form of control. That's not inclusion. And if everybody's talking about being inclusive, then it doesn't, perhaps your profession is just as important as your race, just important as your birth date, your weight, your sex. You want to talk about inclusion? That's inclusion. We're all equal and we need to move forward and do the best that we can with what we've been given, individually and collectively.
So how can we move forward there in terms of, you mentioned maybe by areas, there's those specializations or designations or perhaps I'm just paraphrasing there, but you had mentioned like this different licenses in different areas. How kind of would that look in terms of whether you're a lawyer or a paralegal, in terms of just having this immigration law expertise, or I don't know, law side isn't really like the word expert, but sort of a proficiency in those areas. Is that needed, I guess, for any area that you go and practice in? Because currently you can move from small claims to landlord tenant to any one of the tribunals.
Yep.
And there's nothing within your scope restricting you. Same with me. I can move from real estate one day.
Just because you can doesn't mean you should, JP.
Right, and that's what I'm looking at in terms of, do we need some kind of minimum credentials for that, or are we kind of governed by?
We already have that. You have to do 2 years to be a paralegal. You have to go to law school to be a lawyer. You have to article. You have to do a placement. Don't we already have those controls? What we're really talking about here is expanding the education and the perception of it. We're not selling separation. We're selling intelligence for understanding. And it leads to results in the right hands. And I'm telling you, there are all kinds of people who are at their end of their careers, at the end of their life cycle, who have all of this knowledge. And the one thing I love about the Asian countries is that they revere their old, they revere their engineers, they revere their artists, because they hold something that everybody needs. And tell me they wouldn't be wanting to teach those classes if we expanded the universities and said, look, this is how we're going to expand the scope of practice. This is how we're going to expand the ability for people to have access to judges. Are we going to expand the number of community clinics? 95% of the people that come to my office have no idea that there is a community clinic or where it is or how to find it. How did that happen? And how did all the division at the Law Society happen? How do these arguments get so bitter that I listened to an hour interview and 30% of it was how bitter people are talking to people on the law side? People stop listening. I don't know if they're stressed out. I don't know if they're that far apart or that they've been mean to each other, but this all has to come to an end. We have to come back and start over again. And that's what it's going to take, whether it's bringing back people to the discussion or bringing in educational development. Education is not 2, 4, 8 years. It's a lifelong process. And it saves its greatest lesson for last. And no one is immune to that. And the sooner that they welcome that, they adopt that, the pain gets easier to deal with and actually feels good to go home from a hard day's work.
So then how do we get on that page, right? Because again, after the elections, regardless of who's going to be elected, we can have people from one coalition, one slate. We can have a number of independents. We have obviously 40 lawyers that will be elected. We'll have 5 paralegals, and then there'll be 8 members of the public appointed. But taking
You're
all
going to need every single bencher looking at each other going, I'm going to do the best I can for you. And I need your help to do the best I can for everybody in Ontario. And anything less is not the best.
But how, in terms,
Either
I guess,
I help or you just want to stop.
from you personally, I guess, when you're, let's say, if you are elected, and with all of these sort of positions that are held, I guess, with all the different, how can you sort of build together then, or how can you work within that framework to advance the things that we were just discussing about?
Well, I can tell you this, and this probably would apply to the students watching or the mid-career individuals that are out there. The people at the top that you think have all the money and the power and the connections, well, they retire and they pass away, and they're always looking beneath them to see who's coming up in the next 5 or 6 years that they can hand the reins of justice and leadership to. And the ones that are fair, the ones that listen, the ones that stay long and arrive early, that aren't afraid to clean up the garbage and make the coffee, they're the ones who are defining themselves to be leadership. It all depends on what you're willing to put in is what you will get back. And don't think for 1 second you're going to shortchange the law. Because if you don't play right with your, you don't play right with your trust money and all the other things, it's not long before it goes away. Just like the clients, if you don't treat them right.
Now, in terms of, I guess, the scope there that we were talking about, because again, there's points there of essentially, as you said, look, well, we have gotten the experience over the 1 or 2 years of education. How kind of to look at going from there to what's currently in the scope, and whether it's family law, whether it's immigration, whether it's divisional court, but then getting to convocation where you need 27 people to support expansion in the public interest. What can we do there in terms of getting from where we are to there in terms of getting those things passed?
Like I said, people fail to communicate, nothing gets done. And that's what I think is really happening to a large extent for not for the immediate needs, but for the long-term goals that we should be looking at. We need to get past ourselves of putting labels on each other and start working on plans that are not just 5, 10, or 25 years. I remember when I was at the Premier's symposium for the Toronto Airport 43, it was the Sound Mitigation and Marketing Plan. There was a group of 60 of us that put together a 243-page plan, and we listened to sound mitigation business models from all over the world. You could hear a pin drop in that room when somebody else was speaking, and that's what needs to happen. I watch Parliament, and it just grieves my soul to see these individuals acting like that instead of listening, to understand and adding to that understanding to make something work. Instead, they, it's a lot of puppetry and bravado, and it seems that that's entered the Law Society. And I see too many of the past benchers and current benchers talking in those terms. It's time to put the children's toys away and start thinking about what's best for the province, what's best for the public interest, and then start working on something at the same time that increases the value of being a lawyer or a paralegal or being on a committee at the LSO. That there are benefits to make sure that your kids don't, you don't have to worry about your kids getting the medicine or having to do this and all that kind of stuff. Those should be the least of our worries as benchers. I think it's adding to the problem and not solving it. I think if those things are addressed, other situations will be addressed in kind.
Now let's move on, I guess, from scope there in terms of other issues here at the election there. Maybe you could highlight some of the other things that you're most concerned about, and if elected as bencher, that you'll focus your time to in addition to what we've discussed already, in terms of changing or improving or enhancing.
Well, I think a lot has to be done with the way that licensees and fresh licensees are treated in terms of their annual dues and that sort of thing. Because I know an awful lot of young paralegals that are having extreme problems, and the numbers of lawyer students and stuff like that are just barely making it. And I'm not talking about how the economy is doing. That's definitely a great conversation for another day. But we have to do something as the benchers to make it easier for students to complete their programs and to get I've heard a lot about competency. Yes, they need a lot more. You can't pretend that you've given somebody a law degree and a paralegal diploma or degree and they get out of school not knowing which form to fill out or how. I mean, so you know the law, great. How are you going to argue it if you don't know the form to get you into the court? That's a disservice that both, I think, articling students and paralegal students are facing. That we're not directing, and I'm just speaking out loud here. I don't believe, and I was appointed by the president at Humber College, directory there for the degree in paralegal diploma program, and I don't see an awful lot of confidence from the students to start on their own, to start their own office or to work. They always think they don't know anything. Why is that? Why don't they feel like they know something after 2 years or 4 years or 8 years? It's because they don't have the forms. They've had no practical experience in the courts. They're not getting the experience they need to calm down. And I tell my students, and it's no different for an articling student or a paralegal student, you're your first client. You need to get your bias and perception out of the way, because the man or woman sitting on the bench is just somebody at a bus stop listening to a story. And you're going to back up that story with somebody else's story called case precedent. And if you listen, if you learn to listen, your first and free tool is your ears. If you learn to listen, you're going to deliver a great story and you're going to back it up with the right cases. But if they don't get to that point, if they don't get that in their educational system, in the cycle of their educational system, 2, 4, 8 years, how are they expected to succeed? And what service are we really performing in the public interest if they have no real court experience? A classroom is not a courtroom, and it's no place for you to learn unless you know how to stand on your own 2 feet and you've got the experience, you've got the credibility to be there. And I see an awful lot of young spirits being broken simply because they find out that they didn't know how to fill out that form, they didn't know where to go, and they didn't know what to supplement it with, even a simple affidavit for an appeal. It's shocking that these things aren't taught better, and that the competencies that we're in charge of delivering those competencies are not there because we never put them in place. You put a crest on a building and say, yeah, you're an accredited university. Are you really? And I can tell you now, I think we all know a few names of community colleges and even some universities that profess that they're giving top flight educations for ridiculous money. Are they? This is all governance issues, and we all need to work on them and make this better. And there are lots of things to be decided. So let's work together. Let's listen to each other. Let's put the attitudes aside. And even if we can't agree, we should never, ever walk out and say somebody's an idiot. Because someday they're going to know what I don't know.
Now, I guess in terms of looking at those gaps there in forms and more practical things. Now, one of the changes that just came out, I think in the last 2 weeks, there is for paralegals, the minimum hours for their placement are gone from 120 to 240 hours. So is this a question of that should still be, though the programs, regardless of where they're accredited, should there be more of a focus on learning those practical elements in school? Or is this something when paralegals go on their internship, or paralegal students go on their internship, that 240 hours, is that time to learn sort of the more practical side, or is it kind of a mix of both? What would you see as sort of the best ways to improve the gap that you've identified?
Well, at the worst end, you've got 120 hours of stuffing envelopes. And then you've got the 60 hours of learning something and 60 hours of stuffing envelopes. And at the other end, you get 120 hours of an education that you should have gotten in a classroom. Tell me, when was the last time an articling student actually was required to sit in and start with a case and end the case during their 4-year or 2-year programs? Is that part of their curriculum? Why isn't it? Why aren't they assigned a great case to listen to start to finish while they're going through school? It's an absolute need. What service are we providing to the public if we're not preparing people to be in court? Anyone can read a book, and that seems to be the real talking point for lawyers and paralegals. I have this experience. A lot of I have lawyers that retain me to do landlord and tenant and small claims and careless driving and all those things, and even liquor licenses. Someday I'm going to know something they don't. But does that mean that they're less than I am simply because they don't know something? Oh my God, I could sit in a library and read the same books a lawyer will read in probably half the time. I've gone to U of T and I've been to other universities and colleges, and we've got to work together to understand that this is not about identity. This is about, it's about education that leads to results, to the betterment of society. And if we can't deliver that, we failed. But I think we can. And I think we can do an excellent job of it. And it just takes time and understanding and the willingness, the attitude that says, I'm going to listen. I'm not going to look for negatives. I'm going to look for positives, and we're going to go forward. Even if I don't agree with what it is that's going forward, my turn will come. My ideas will have their day. There's always this balance. It always rocks back and forth. But it's no place for people who don't want to work together. And if you're high strung and outspoken, find the temperament that you need so that you invite people and encourage people to listen, even if they don't want to agree.
So what about after being licensed? I mean, I think I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it's sort of alarming in terms of how many paralegals become licensed and then are not practicing within a very short period of time. I know if you look at the amount of licensed paralegals versus the amount of practicing paralegals, now we've talked a bit there about what can be done on the education front, but post licensing, what can the Law Society in their role, again, in the public interest, because if there's all these potential paralegals there that can take on matters and address deficiencies, what can be done?
You got a lot going on there, JP. I got to unpack a little bit at a time, okay? The first thing is that how do you address the need? Okay, well, you got to stop, and all I can tell you is my perception. I have no actual statistic database for this. It's my opinion based on my observation, and that's 25 years of watching what's been going on before licensing and after licensing. You've got to stop allowing the law to be treated like a business, like an educational business. I mean, the minute that the community colleges, and I'm talking from the very worst to the very best, the minute that they see a revenue avenue for an educational stream, they've got the textbook, they've got the teacher, they've got the classroom, they just got to start marketing to the students. But what happens when you start graduating 500 students every semester, 2 semesters a year, to the same place people are finding it hard to get work? You do 2 things. You saturate it to where there's nobody that can cover their expenses, that they're taking 2 clients to have the same revenue. And eventually they'll have twice the work, half the cash. How long will it be before they go bankrupt or can't afford their insurance or their Law Society fees? And this is a common problem from paralegals to law students. We got to stop treating the educational system like it's a business. It's a hope based on perseverance, understanding, and skills. And if we keep telling people it's a quick fix and start and continue to govern where you're getting all of these graduates that can't find the work, it's going to create further problems than we've got now. Could you imagine if all this silliness continues for another 10 years, 20 years? Do I want to see that? I've watched it for 25 years. It's like the Toronto Maple Leafs. They're always selling prestige. But are they succeeding simply because they bought that university or they bought that textbook or that extra course? I've always believed that the more education you get, the better decisions you can make, but it doesn't change how you deal with others when you're in a group to make choices. Choices that take courage, choices that take patience, and certainly money. And how do you agree on how money is spent? Especially when some people think it's endless and others think it can be borrowed and others think I don't have the strength to earn another $5. I think we need to employ our ability to be careful. I mean, we didn't get to where we are in our practices by being foolish. So what makes us think we can be silly in the chamber. There's lots to be done, and it needs to be done right.
Well, so then in terms of maybe the business or the practice management side, right? I mean, perhaps there is this looking at and entering into the industry and fresh out of becoming licensed, passing the licensing exam, right? That people were writing last week, getting the good result. And then is it needing more training? I know the law side is a new initiative for sole practitioners that they're rolling out, but is that what's stopping some people from opening up their own doors, or what can you see in terms of from that framework? I mean, especially for paralegals, where it appears, I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it appears there are not as many big law practices, big firms compared to law firms like with lawyers, right? I mean, is that sort of, if you build it, they will come, type of thing, that if we have more of those in place, that people will be more comfortable, they can get the mentorship they need, and then branch off from there.
It's a good point. How far do you go with, the company's going to have the resources to not only service clients, but service the people that service the clients, right? That's initiative. That's, taking care of the money. And I tell students, I mean, you've learned after 2 to 4 years how to manage on nothing. So use that skill while the next 2 to 4 years passes, and eventually they will cross paths. Your perseverance and your market share. And eventually the money will start to come in. But because you learn to take care of a dollar, that dollar is going to turn into a lot more than just in your pocket. You're going to see buildings, you're going to see cars, you're going to see people's pension plans. That's how it should be managed. And that's the thought that has to be taught in schools, that this is not a quick fix. It's not just an experience. It's a choice. It's a lifetime. My law is not something to be toyed with. It's to be respected and it's to be enjoyed. But it all starts with the right schooling and the right opportunity. And like I said, if you don't have the curriculum, if you don't have the extended courses, so you graduate with a 2-year diploma, you graduate with a 4-year parallel degree, you graduate with a law degree. What's next after that? Where is the course that teaches you in the specific area you're going to go? Does it exist? And if it does exist, is there an opportunity to watch those kinds of cases from start to finish on a court calendar? Can we not emerge those court calendars into the curriculum so that when they start, they graduate when their cases start coming and going? I think it's an idea that we need to look at in terms of settling the marketplace better, because everybody needs to pay the hydro bill, and I see a lot of people go into this and a lot of people go into that. And when that slows down, they run into something else. It's kind of reminds me of when Ontario Services started. They took, OHIP, marriages, and Ministry of Transport, and put everybody that worked for them into the same place. And you were lucky if you got 1 in 4 people who had an idea how to do what you needed to do. It sort of reminds me of that. And I think that the experiment and the experience with the business of education has gone far enough. Too many people are expecting they're going to walk out of a school, whether it's a university or a college, and they're going to walk into big money. No, you're not. You might be able to walk from that university into a courtroom and be able to have a general conversation with somebody who's your senior about the specifics of what you're witnessing in a courtroom, and what the facts are, and what the strategy of both sides is. And hopefully you get a wind up of what they just witnessed, and what's good about it, what's bad about it, and what they can do in the future with it. But until we start treating the profession with the long-term idea that it's a privilege, not a right to go out and make money. It's not a license to print money. I remember when I was young, working for doing candidacy and calls and stuff like that. And then when I started in my practice doing liquor licenses, and 90% of the places that I helped, they thought of liquor licenses as a license to print money. And that's what I'm seeing with law licenses and paralegal licenses. That mentality has to stop. because it's driving everybody to think that they've just got to get their share, and that they're at odds with each other so badly that they're even talking about this stuff during their interviews about what the public interest is. Well, first off, I'll tell you what the public interest is. They're interested in us getting our act together so that we can do something about their act. And the sooner we do it, the better. I think we need to support each other. We need to get a health plan together so that our body and minds can relax, not just tell each other that we're going to be okay. Take one of those stress courses. No, we need to know that we have a safety net that will compel us to go the extra mile so that we can get the job done for the public interest. You know, you can't run a truck on one flat tire. It doesn't work that way. And that's what happens when lawyers and paralegals get overworked. They run out of energy. You know, it's planned obsolescence. The minute you start taking too many clients, it's just a matter of time before you're out of wind, out of time, and out of money. It doesn't need to be that way.
So for those that are already, at this point, right, in terms of, they've gone through whatever, or they were grandfathered or grandparented in, they've gone through education, and as you pointed out, potentially some areas of deficiency, but they're here either practicing a little bit or a lot, or trying to get into practice. And what can then, in terms of the Law Society through the benchers and generally do in terms of, you also mentioned mental health and again avoiding burning out. But in terms of, is it programming? Is it having better strategies or structures in place post licensing? For those who are already there, what can be done to kind of address and all of the things that you just brought up?
Well, unless they've got financing, and one of the things I did, and I graduated from a lot of things, I always found that when I was planning out my next 2 or 3 years, that if I saw, even with that new diploma or with that new venture, there was going to be a period of adjustment, like 6 months until you can touch the trust, because that's when you close your clients. Well, take a course at college. As long as you're, as I understand, as long as you're taking 3 or 4 courses, you get full-time funding. Obviously, you're not going to have enough clients to take up 5 days of a work week, let alone your extra Saturdays and Sundays, which a lot of senior paralegals are doing to make the bills. There's other options to be able to afford so that you can advance your future while still protecting your present and not robbing your future. I have between 1 and 4 students every semester, and I have done for at least 10, 15 years, somewhere in there. It's a wonderful experience. And if I can, I bring a student in. And if I can, I pay their bus fees, I pay for their gas. I do all those things, and I put them right in. I had a student their second day, right into court, talking to a judge, because this is not philosophy. This is debate, confrontation. It's all the things that you think happen on the street, but in a dignified way. Minds clash, ideas clash, and you've got to be able to hold yourself. And the sooner that they get a taste of that reality, and of course, experience appropriate, it encourages them to take a bigger chance later, and it gives them the confidence to make that choice. Because the more choices they make for themselves as their first client, the more likely they're going to be able to succeed for a paying client. That goes for lawyers, and it goes for paralegals.
Yeah, it's always great and admirable when people with years of experience in the profession are taking on students. Not even just generally in an internship model, right? Even mentorship beyond being licensed, right? That you can have a newly licensed paralegal and they can pick up the phone, or nowadays, fire off a message to you on LinkedIn and say, "Hey, Sean, I'm a newly licensed paralegal. I'm just trying to learn this area." And is there ways we can sort of better encourage or connect senior paralegal, especially paralegals? We're talking in the paralegal industry here, but it also applies for lawyers as well. But is there like this gap there between sort of the more established experience and the newer license? Like, what can we do to kind of enact
Well,
them better?
the Law Society and its governance, that majority of individuals that had the numbers to vote for their will, wanted to introduce a statement of principles. Why don't you make it so that every legal, paralegal office or law offices has to take students mandatory? That's a great idea. Never been done yet. It will be if I get elected, or at least the discussion will be started. And hopefully someday good things happen. You want solutions? Look at home first. Look what the people who are in the place and doing well. And even if they're not doing well, what can we do for the ones that are coming, the ones that are retiring? How do we get the experience from the people at the top to help make it easier for the people at the bottom? Because someday those people at the bottom are going to rise to the top where all that money is, because those people retire and pass away. And they're looking for those people that they can trust to take the reins of justice into the future. Let's start working on that together.
Now, Sean, is there any, I mean, we've talked about scope. We've talked here now about improvements for education and newly licensed paralegals to get some of that competencies as we've been discussing. Is there anything else there in terms of, if you're elected bencher, that you can highlight as areas to fix or improve within the framework of the Law Society? Again, as you put it, in improving the public interest in terms of addressing what's out there where there's matters that are needing assistance from counsel, whether a lawyer or a paralegal, and they're just not there, right? You pointed out to not even knowing where the clinics are, right? In terms of some people that call you up, what more can we do in terms of these or any other areas?
Well, I've often thought to myself, John Paul, that there should be a placement requirement for professionals, not just in the community offices, but also a requirement of pro bono work in the shelters, in the prisons, wherever we can take the most disadvantaged, the forgotten, those who have nothing going for them, and trying to say, look, you're worth our time. And fortunately, our government is helping pay for it. There's no reason that we can't do all these things. There's more work to be done, more ideas to be discovered, and I'm looking forward to being part of that conversation.
Now, we've talked a bit about students here, and when as we sort of get towards the finish line there with this interview, and one of the themes there is kind of looking at them in terms of getting their growth and experience. Any words of wisdom do you have for the paralegal students that are listening to this interview, and all your years of experience and advice and all the students you've taken on? What can you kind of impart, and what have you already imparted to the people that come to your door?
Okay, well, let me just speak to the law students and the paralegal students. And I'm not speaking to the ones that are doing really well. I want to talk to the ones that are just getting the grade, they're just making it, and they're confused about what their future holds. Stay in your seat. A real mark of character is finishing what you start, no matter how it finishes, as long as you put your best into it. And if you need a tutor, get one. I had tutors all through school, and I learned to love them. Some of them are still my friends. But the most important part is that you finish what you start, even if you're failing. Stay with it, because eventually what you've learned here, whatever you go on to another course, or wherever, you're going to use these lessons to succeed there, and you will succeed. Just don't give up. Stay in your seat.
Just before we wrap up there, I don't know if there's anything else you may wanted to have talked about or addressed there. So I'll give you the opportunity to point out anything else, either in your platform, in your vision, or anything.
Well, the only thing I can tell you is if you like what you hear and you'd want, and this goes for the benchers and paralegals that are out there as benchers looking to vote, if you'd like to have conversations about what the public interest is and help me along, or have a conversation about what the future holds, I'd love to have that. Please vote for me, and don't forget Matthew Olson and Jeffrey Smith. They're both competent individuals, and I would really like to be on the benchers board in that chair with them and having these conversations.
Perfect. So, Sean, thank you so much for taking the time and joining us. I guess you kind of touched on it there, but why should the paralegals that are listening, whether newly licensed or oldly licensed or anywhere in between, why should they get your vote? And as well as you mentioned, the other individuals that are, running with you?
Well, I'm not going to sing, dance, or audition. These are competent individuals that make votes, and by the time that they've got through college and got their license, I'm going to trust their judgment, and I'm going to follow their direction. And I live by my. This isn't about being right. This is about getting it right. And I'll watch the numbers and see if I get my chair this time. And if not, I'll probably run again like next election. But I'd still like to be part of that conversation, and I wish that convocation and all those things were more open to us, so that we were all part of the continuing discussion, not just every 4 years when somebody's trying to get elected, because that smells of an agenda. To me, I want us all to have the same conversation at the same time. And that's going to be one of the things that I'm going to work on, is that the information at convocation and the discussion gets to the people that voted and the people who didn't, and the people who are going to be voting in 5 years while they're still in school. We've got to merge this cycle of life and law all together, so that you are in court, you're in class, you're in discussion with the convocation, that you get a real experience. And when you're finished and you retire, you can go, oh, what a ride. Thank you, John Paul. I appreciate your time, sir.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sean. And what a ride. Good way to end everything off here. Wish you all the best, and thanks for everyone for tuning in. Take care.
Thanks for your time. Good day.